Common sense has prevailed, and a city has decided not to force landlords to pay the unpaid utility bills of their tenants. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting topic for you today, and it's coming out of the state of Wyoming, and specifically the city of Casper, Wyoming. And the reason I'm bringing up this town, even though it's not a very big city, is because they were actually looking at forcing landlords to pay the unpaid utility bills of tenants. So basically, if a tenant charged up a whole bunch of, utility bills, they didn't pay those bills, they were going to force the landlords to pay it. And I have a big problem with that. I have a problem with somebody accumulating a huge amount of debt and then them going out and looking for somebody who did not accumulate the debt and forcing that person to pay for it, because that's exactly what they're talking about in this sort of situation. So fortunately, this didn't pass, but this is the sort of thing that these local municipalities, this is what they want to do. They blame the property owner for problems that are caused by the tenant. In my personal opinion, it's wrong. It's just dead wrong, okay? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul, okay? You're saying, okay, we got a tenant here. This person used up, let's say, $10,000 worth of electricity, didn't pay their bill, but rather than going after that tenant, getting a judgment against them, garnishing their wages, ruining their credit, forcing them to pay, we're going to go after Bob, his landlord, who did not accumulate all that debt, who paid all his bills on time, who did everything right, and we're going to steal his money instead. Okay, that is literally theft by the government. And I'm not surprised about it at all. They'll sit there, oh, we're losing so much money. Well, whose fault is that? Okay, it's not the landlord's fault, it's the tenant's fault. You need to go after the right person. And you know what? If you don't pay as the landlord in that sort of situation, it's your credit that's ruined. It's your utilities that can never be turned on again. So yeah, you screw the landlords over in that sort of situation. So what a lot of cities have done is, and they talk about that in the article, some of the cities require, and I mean require, the landlord to pay all of the utilities. Now, I have a big problem with that as well, because as you know, when a tenant doesn't have to pay the utilities, they use way more than they need. They basically waste a ton of money. They'll leave the water running. They'll let that toilet run forever. I just did a story about somebody who had an $18,000 water bill because the toilet was left running. So how is it fair for the landlord to have to figure out, this is the extra amount I'm going to have to charge to the monthly rent? It's just not right. It's not right. And I believe personally that the person who uses the utility should be responsible for them. Now, I know there are some buildings that are built in a certain manner where, you might have one master water meter and everybody has to, contribute a portion of their rent to paying that water bill, right? But in the cases where you have a building where each unit is individually metered, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever to even involve the landlord in the process. It's no different than somebody having a house, owning a home, and having their own personal, water, gas, electric meter built onto the home, measuring the exact amount they use, right? That person uses a lot of the power or the utilities or whatever, right? Doesn't pay their bill. Well, the city can come in and cut them off and then try to get the money back that's owed. They don't go and say, well, yeah, but let's go over to the neighbor's house because the neighbor has the ability to pay, and force them to pay the utilities for the person who is not paying. No, they don't do that, okay? Yeah, it's making the costs higher for those who do pay. But here's the issue, right? We're talking about the issue of fairness. We're talking about the issue of stealing from somebody who did not use or even have use of the utilities. And the person who did cause the problem, right? They can just disappear. They can go off into the wind and never pay and never face any consequences. And how is that fair? It's just not. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So first question I have for the landlords on here, do you have to pay any of the utilities for the tenants in your property? Okay. The second thing I have to ask is, in the area where you invest, right, is the landlord responsible for any of the utility bills if the tenant doesn't pay? Now, I know laws, they vary. They vary. Even in more right-leaning, pro-landlord states, you can still get completely screwed over by this utility bill issue. And I'd love to see something that says that, hey, the landlord is never responsible. I'd love to see that nationwide, okay? Landlords shouldn't ever be responsible for someone else's bills. That's my personal opinion. But so I guess these local politicians, they disagree with me. So anyway, they didn't end up passing this bill, but let's get into the article and see what it says. This article is coming from trib.com, and it says, and that's the Casper Star Tribune, and it says, utility bill ordinance passes without making landlords responsible for tenants' unpaid bills. And my hope is that it never passes, okay? I mean, I think that they came to the right, they made the right decision in this case right now, but they were talking about looking into it again in the future, and that's scary right there, okay? So anyway, let's see what the article says. It sounds like, write the script to have an amendment to remove G, Mayor Steve Cathy told City Manager Carter Napier at the February 13th work session. G referenced point G of section 13.03.050 of a proposed ordinance that would change how the city of Casper bills utility rates and collects late charges. The point says that landlords and property owners would be responsible for those charges if tenants could not or would not pay them. That is according to the original version of the proposed ordinance. The version that actually passed its third and final reading at Tuesday's City Council meeting was stripped of point G and the last sentence of point A in order to make it agree with itself. It slid through narrowly. All councilors except the mayor, Ray Pacheco, and Michael Bond voted to remove said section. Vice Mayor Lisa Ingebretson recused herself from the vote. So narrowly, they were able to get this removed, so it is likely that something like this could pop up again in the future. And as it said in that second paragraph, it would make it so that landlords would be responsible for the utility bill if the tenant could not or would not pay it. So if the tenant refuses to pay, or even if the tenant couldn't pay because, they just ain't got no money or whatever, right? The landlord would have to pony up the money. Talk about what kind of logic is this? I mean, they could have wrote anybody's name. You know what? If the tenant or the person using the utilities cannot pay, then we're going to write in here that McDonald's has to pay it. Like, what? Like, what does McDonald's have to do with it? They didn't use that power. Well, how did the landlord use the power? They didn't use the power either, okay? Just because you're sitting in their building doesn't mean that they are the customer. They're not. Gee, this is so idiotic. It's like they don't have any common sense. They can't possibly have common sense, because if you think about it for even 1 second, you're like, yeah, that is literally stealing money from somebody who didn't use the utilities. Maybe we shouldn't do that. At that February 13th work session, councilors debated what to do with the ordinance now that point G was on the brink of being cut. They decided that if G didn't make it, they would request that city staff revisit the issue with them in 6 months. There was no scientific rhyme or reason to that number. Councilors hope that city staff will have enough concrete data to revisit at that point. So yeah, like I said, they're going to revisit this issue in 6 months. And you know what? It could end up passing at that point. So the issue isn't dead just yet. But fortunately for now, landlords are going to be free of paying other people's utility bills. And yeah, it is possible to accumulate thousands of dollars in utility debt, because certain municipalities passed laws that said, oh, well, we can't turn off the utilities on somebody in the middle of winter time. So what you end up with is tenants who have thousands of dollars in utility debt and no intention or way of paying that debt back. So my question is, right, why not just send these people to collections and have a collection agency do its best? And because you know what, it in terms of fairness, it is just dead wrong thinking that, hey, oh, well, the landlord's got the money to pay us, so we're going to go after the landlord, or we'll put a lien on their property, take their property. Because that's what this really comes down to right there, okay? If the landlord doesn't pay, then they will take the landlord's property. They'll put a lien on the property, they'll take it, and then they'll be able to get their money. That's the way they see it. That's the way these greedy, stupid bureaucrats act, okay? And I can't stand this sort of nonsense. Imagine being a landlord and them coming up to you and saying, hey, you have to pay this, let's say a $5,000 utility bill that this tenant didn't pay. And you don't have the ability to pay it because you own one single family house. You're a small mom and pop landlord. You're barely able to pay the bills yourself. Maybe that tenant, you had to evict that tenant, costing you thousands in lost rent and damages to your property, and you're already deep in the hole. But now you got to come up with a $5,000 utility bill on top of that? Well, that's enough to push you into bankruptcy at that point. And guess what? They take your property away. So, yeah, I'm so opposed to these stupid sorts of laws. City staff, including Napier and Financial Services Director Jill Johnson, supported the original version of the proposed ordinance up until the final bill. Their argument remained unchanged. If the city can't collect from the tenants when their past due bills are piling up, then ratepayers are absorbing those rising costs. Their aim with this, they said, was to tighten the belts for landlords, whom they view as business owners with their properties being the businesses, which would in turn reduce how much the city has to write off and send to collections, which would in turn reduce bills. So they're so worried about reducing the bills for the city. Oh, we got to get this city budget aligned. So I have an idea. Let's bankrupt the businesses that are located in the city. They said landlords were businesses, right? Let's put a financial burden on these businesses that makes them want to leave the city. That's a great idea. Wow, man, what idiocy. You know, like these people, they don't think at all. You know, like it doesn't surprise me one bit that these people work for the government, okay? They work for the government. They don't care if a business owner has to suffer. They don't care if somebody ends up paying somebody else's bills for them. They just want to collect more tax money. Okay, they want more revenue coming in. And for what? For what? You're supposed to serve the people. You're supposed to serve the businesses within your city. And yeah, you're going to have to write off some losses. That's just a fact of life. You're going to have to send collections after people who don't pay their bills. Every business does this exact same thing. When one of my tenants doesn't pay me, I don't go and try to collect the money from the tenant next door. Okay, but that's what you're suggesting that I do. So yeah, go screw yourselves, you stupid bureaucrats. I mean, it just annoys the heck out of me. So let me know what you think of all this nonsense, okay? I have a lot of issues with all of these different utility laws. I've dealt with some of them in different properties that I've owned. I've owned many properties in many different states. And you know what? This issue has hit me. And, you know, like it is one of those things where, you know, it just frustrates the living heck out of me.